Hey there, it's time for another in real life video. This time, we're talking about some fairly recent topical news about the acquisition of Microsoft and ABK, or Microsoft acquiring ABK. A lot of this stuff, it's been going on for a while. There's been so many hearings where leaked information got out in some form or another. We even had a past video about leaks as it pertained to BGS. This time, we're just sort of talking more broadly about it because it is a pretty enormous deal. It is literally an enormous deal, but also it's figuratively an enormous deal in that there's potentially very few other situations where this would ever happen again. Right? There are very few great, enormous companies that could be even bought out. EA has been recently in the news as Disney was looking to acquire them. They were thinking about it. They were thinking about Disney acquiring EA because, you know, they've already made a number of fairly successful Star Wars games, and even looking back a bit to just Microsoft itself, they've acquired so many things recently, right? They put out a trailer about the recent ABK, Activision Blizzard King acquisition, which showed off a whole bunch of their properties, not just ABK ones, but obviously including. And it's wild to look at that and see just how many different studios they have recently merged and acquired. In the trailer, they even show through Activision Blizzard King's acquisition, they now have Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon. It's just absolutely wild to even start to consider, given the fact that those were originally on Sony platforms. And conversely, Sony now owns Bungie. It's really wild to see all this consolidation. And of course, all of this corporate consolidation, you know, it naturally at a glance seems like, oh, this is a pretty wild and scary thing happening, that one company keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger by way of just eating up all these other smaller ones, right? And it's not even just in the case of Microsoft, but we've also seen, like I said, with Sony, they acquired a few others. The Embracer Group recently has been in pretty hot water for acquiring a whole bunch of studios and stuff, and basically not having any idea of what to do with them and how to handle whenever they put out something that isn't a hit. During pandemic times, where a lot of these big companies were buying up smaller studios because they had extra cash on hand, and that cash was becoming less and less valuable as time went on. So they tried to invest it in buying other smaller studios. And now we're seeing sort of the consequences of that rapid expansion and mismanagement. Let's go back to talking about the most recent news, right? About Microsoft buying and acquiring and merging with ABK, Activision Blizzard King. The weirder aspect of them acquiring ABK, that's kind of different from their past acquisitions, Microsoft's past acquisitions. Lest we forget, like we said, they bought up all of ZeniMax media companies. They bought up BGS, id, Machine Games, everybody that came with ZeniMax. Like I said, ZeniMax Studios themselves, who do ESO and their unannounced MMO that they've been rumored to be working on. Before that, they bought Obsidian. They bought In Exile. They bought Double Fine. They bought, even before all of that, they bought up Rare. They bought Minecraft. Remember that one? That was like the first really big one that I remember a while back now. I don't even remember how many years ago that was when they bought up Minecraft. But that was a pretty big one. And this one, them buying up ABK completely eclipses it. As I was about to say, in this case, it's a little weird because ABK, Activision Blizzard King, is widely regarded as in and of itself being fairly mismanaged. This is for the most part how I feel about it as well. Like, it is weird and scary how this great conglomerate, right, is acquiring more and more, getting bigger and bigger, this great consolidation of the industry, right? It happens to a lot of other industries and stuff. It's our time now in games for this to happen. It's a product that is taken its roots at the beginning of the system itself, right? That consolidation like this seems inevitable if the industry, as it were, goes on for long enough. Eventually, things just get to that point. In this case, Blizzard and Activision, and to some extent King, have been in the news a ton recently for being so grossly mismanaged. There have been so many people who left. There were all those sexual harassment issues at Blizzard. Loads of people were either laid off or voluntarily retired, either due to weird timing or because of those scandals getting out. And Bobby Kotick himself, much maligned in video games, has been heading all of that and is certainly doesn't have his hands clean in this situation, right? He himself, I believe, allegedly, right? Don't sue me, Bobby, or whatever, but allegedly said that he was going to have an employee killed. He got so angry. He said they wanted some employee killed if they didn't do something or other. I forget exactly what it was, but it was hugely, massively in the news about him threatening the life of one of his own employees. And that's sort of what makes this whole situation so peculiar with Microsoft buying them out, because now Bobby Kotick is out by the end of 2023. I forget if it's fiscal year 2023 or 2023 normal people year that he'll be retiring or just ousted from being the head of ABK, and he'll go on to something else. Who knows what? Maybe he'll just retire. I highly doubt it. I bet he'll put his fingers in something else. He will, of course, have a massive payout. He'll have, his whole golden parachute stuff that many folks have been talking about for a while now, since people were even daydreaming about the idea of him leaving. And that's sort of why this entire situation with ABK being bought out is weirdly complicated, because of how horrible a lot of the conditions were and are at ABK, right? With Microsoft buying them, now they don't have to deal with Bobby Kotick eventually, well, soon enough. Maybe that will be a noticeable improvement. We've seen at ABK a lot of studios and stuff under that banner have to work on other weird projects. Case in point, I think it was Toys for Bob, wasn't it? This smaller studio under their banner who did, I think, the Tony Hawk remakes or remasters. The Tony Hawk 1 and 2 Pro Skater remasters or remakes, I forget. But that did very well. It sold very well. It was super popular. A lot of people were talking about it in its time, but it just wasn't quite enough. It just was not quite enough. And ultimately, Toys for Bob ended up now having to work on Call of Duty, which overall seems like a pretty rough deal for games in general, right? To have them sort of rolled up into the Call of Duty machine, as it were, which isn't to say there should be no Call of Duty, but, the folks who were successfully making other things, granted, it wasn't as much money as Call of Duty is able to garner. They should still be making their own stuff, right? Otherwise, you're just going to keep working on Call of Duty until eventually something happens where the money starts to drain out. And then what do you do, right? And then you're sort of caught in a situation where it's like, wow, I wish we had other IP that was successful and that we could lean on whenever Call of Duty isn't able to push out big numbers, right? And hopefully under Microsoft, they'll eventually get to that, right? Maybe they won't, right? Microsoft as well famously takes quite the hands-off approach to a lot of their acquisitions, as we've seen in the past. Maybe they won't, but at the very least, the chance is significantly higher than it was under Bobby Kotick while they were independent. But yeah, ABK has no shortage of internal problems in and of itself. And I think at the very least, a lot of people are celebrating the fact that Bobby is finally out after years and years of hearing about this horrible dude he's finally out of that whole company, right? Like I said, unfortunate that he is getting the whole golden parachute situation, obviously. I mean, what all can you really do about that? But as far my understanding is that Bobby and his entire board that did support him and his decisions to just make money no matter what, just extract the most amount of money out of the talent as possible, they're all out as well. They'll be leaving around the same time as he does. So all in all, I think my take on the situation is that you do have to be wary about these companies acquiring all this stuff, right? That is an ever-present worry, and frankly, it feels like an inevitability. Like we said, it's this sort of situation feels baked into the system itself, like it will always happen if an industry goes on long enough and gets big enough, right? It is just a fact of the system. You would need to change the system itself in order to prevent this from happening eternally. So many other industries have it to where these enormous conglomerations, these enormous companies, corporate entities exist, and then they sweep up anyone who's fairly small that they have a glint in their eye for as we continue with industry consolidation in this way. We start seeing this crop up in video games. Maybe we already are seeing it, and we just don't quite know it yet. It may be the case that we see game development studios crop up and higher-ups purely investing in that studio and putting out games and stuff just for the idea that eventually one of these large companies will buy them out. They want to build the company to sell it, not to make games, not to make experiences, but to hire people to work there, to make good games, right? They still want to make good stuff. That way they can get on the radar of these enormous entities and then sell out and be done, right? They themselves want to have that kind of money to get sort of the Bobby Kotick experience, as it were. But the weird catch of it is that in this situation specifically, it weirdly feels like it's probably better for the people working who are still working, still good people, working at Activision Blizzard King. It probably seems like it's for the best that they have gotten acquired, right? It feels weirdly like a positive thing that Bobby Kotick, of course, is gone, right? It feels great that he's gone, but it feels weirdly positive that they have been bought out, as strange as it may be. And that's sort of where I'm at on the entire situation. It feels very bizarre to be effectively like, yeah, it's almost bittersweet, right? In that, yeah, it's a little weird. The bitter part being continued consolidation. The wheel keeps turning, as it were. But then also, at least in the smaller, shorter term, folks at these places who have been suffering, who are still good folks, trying to do work, trying to create things, may find some improvement, some respite from, I don't know, the hellish corporate overlords. That's sort of where I'm at. Do I feel good about it? Do I feel bad about it? I don't know. It depends on what part. As more and more corporate entities begin taking over, people working at these places do, in fact, begin to unionize. As we've seen this year, there's been a lot of movement in union spaces, even in video games. Infamously, video games have had very little in the way of union protections. I think it was just recently in the news that workers at CD Projekt Red started unionizing to protect themselves because since the launch of Cyberpunk 2077, not only, of course, they were just recently in the news saying like, yeah, our morale was massively hit because of the reception of the game, but they were hit with 3 waves of enormous layoffs. It's kind of a strange time. The games industry that we know from, I don't know, 10 years ago or so is going to look fairly different from the one that we see 10 years from now. Anyway, on a more, I guess, upbeat note, on a more positive note, tomorrow, October the 18th, is International Necktie Day, which is why I'm wearing my most horrific necktie in my collection for today's video. And we'll probably, what better reason to begin wearing more neckties during these in real life videos. Eventually, I would like to also start wearing some baseball caps because I quite like pairing them with a tie. That ought to do it for this week's in real life video. Probably a bit of a longer one this time. I'm thinking next week we'll get a viewer submitted question or topic, right? Could be fun to alternate these every so often, I think. Anyway, until next time, please take care of each other.